Welcome to what is now the 13th installment of this program, Living is Dying, where we're studying the essentially the directions that we have from the Buddhist tradition in regards to what happens when we pass on. Remember many years ago when my parents passed away, and we'd go and see very kind vicar, and he would inform us about how we could choose a coffin. He would inform us about how to handle the ceremony and so forth. And he gave a very beautiful eulogy of both my parents. They died at different times, but in sequence. It was all very beautiful, but it was entirely directed at those who were there, and which is very important. And very important that there's a dignified closure to a life, a celebration of a life, that there's all these things really that accommodate the grieving, the pain of those who are left behind. And also, ironically, very often at funerals, this is where you have a very meaningful conversations and connections with friends. The focus of this book, however, is different. Of course, it also accommodates this situation of, you could say, responsibly making preparations and dispositions prior to passing on. But it is about where we go when we pass on, what happens. And this is the subject really of the science from where Rinpoche is coming. It's about the individual, where the individual passes on, and to provide really the conditions for the further journey. And this is not really based on a belief. It's very much based on what we can see is the most fundamental aspect of our entire being, which is our consciousness. And this consciousness, it has the capacity to actually be shaped. We're not just shaped by chemicals in our DNA, but we actually have a mind. We have a mind that we can work with. And that's the inspiration really in the Buddha's teaching, that our mind, while it can go into confusion, it can also free itself from confusion. And so this is what we're going to be discussing today in the section now that we'll be looking at, which is then actually how we can develop a greater wisdom, vipassana. So before I engage in that, that section of the text, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and wherever you might be. And we recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So we'll now look at Rinpoche's text. So let's see here. Now, throughout the book, there's been continual reference to how actually we can calm the mind, how we can essentially direct the mind towards being more conscious, how the mind can be given a context in which we can be more clear. And that we could very often we commonly refer to that as mindfulness or shamatha or meditation in various ways, but there's a very important aspect to what we're doing with this mindfulness, with this calming the mind, because of course, having a mind that's calm and clear is very helpful. But if we're still stuck with some fundamental beliefs in terms of the solid, rigid sense of self, and there's a sense of a solid, concrete world out there, and we actually don't analyze and investigate how actually we are participants in shaping these constructions, then we're left with possibly a very calm mind, but still believing in fact, what doesn't hold up if we actually investigate. We're still stuck with our habitual beliefs. And one of the key aspects of the Buddhist teaching is what we call vipassana. It's greater insight. It's understanding our reality beyond just the appearances. And there are various ways that we can engage that. And of course, within the practice of meditation, while we do calm the mind, we also fuse it with insight, with an understanding that's based on hard analysis, hard understanding of how our reality actually operates. So in meditation, this is something that we cultivate, this greater insight, this vipassana. But there's also a way that we can do this out of meditation. And it's the way that we simply just adopt an attitude and a view with regards to the world around us, all our perceptions. And this is where in the Buddhist teaching, we very often talk about seeing everything as a dream, seeing everything as an illusion, seeing everything as merely a landscape of clouds, seeing everything as an echo. And the implication is that things definitely appear. We're not denying that there's perception and what appears to us is very real. But the point is, we also need to understand these perceptions do not have the concrete nature that we attribute to them. And that's where we have these, what we call examples of illusion, such as rainbow, such as dream, such as illusion, and so forth, in which we all know when a magician can create an illusion, it looks very real. When we have a dream, it seems very real, and so forth. And that's where the practice of seeing things in terms of a wider perspective is really key for what we are doing in terms of eliminating the confusion for this mind that will be traveling on beyond our demise. And so we might think, well, if I begin to see everything as a dream, I'm just going to have a very distant and, unengaged relationship with the world. But that's actually not what's the implication. We actually don't distance ourselves or vague out when we begin to have this attitude. It's about us actually beginning to take down the barriers, take down the censorship, and take down the belief in our rigid constructions about our engagement, our reactions to the world around us. And that's where this actually enables us to be more open. And the entire application or intention behind Vipassana is openness, beginning to connect more with reality. And when we begin to apply these examples of illusion, we begin to actually be more open to what's happening. We get less fixated, we get less stressed, we have less the tendency to be worried or be caught up in anxious anticipation or hopes. It's about more accepting reality, seeing what there is, and being able to relate simply and directly. So when we are engaging in this kind of essentially mind training, which applies to the way that we engage with our ordinary reality, when we do that, we're actually cultivating an attitude of openness. And this is something that will do us good in this present condition. It will also do us good as we travel on beyond our demise. So here, Rinpoche gives some very particular instructions. So he's instructing us to engage with this in terms of preparing us to that place where the grip that we ordinarily have on our reality begins to fade away. And this we actually have every night when we fall asleep. And that's where sleep is very often given as a gauge for how much we actually are conscious, if we can remain conscious in our sleep. And also when we wake up, we can engage the world with a perspective on the basis of having entered into the world from our sleep. So there's some very profound points to be made around this that Rinpoche here will present to us. He says, whatever your belief or spiritual practice, always aspire to recognize that your dreams are just dreams. Know, as you dream, that you are dreaming. The big mistake we all make in every one of our many lives is to imagine that everything we experience is real. Stop making that mistake. So this is not about us just being told that it is in this way, but we actually need to investigate, and we actually need to verify for ourselves how this reality that we attribute to our perceptions, how it actually really exists, and go beyond the appearances. That's where we need to analyze. And we do this very often when we ourselves, we look at our mind and the way that we actually misjudge things, that we're not enabling a proper direct relationship to our world, but very often we filter it through our likes and dislikes. And this comes from attributing solidity to things as if they had an unchanging, solid, unitary reality. Everything is continually in flux, continually in change. And that's where, for us to train in letting go of this grip, the image of the dream is very helpful. And that's where it's interesting, if we train ourselves in being conscious while we're dreaming, we actually begin to have a relationship of freedom within our dream. And similarly, also when we begin to adopt this attitude of just letting go of thinking our things are so solid and real, we're much more free, much more open, much more fluid, and a great sense of being much more what we truly are. So training in this then, Rinpoche says, as you fall asleep, simulate the moment of death by forcing yourself to believe that you're about to die. If you wish, try the following method, which is based on the practice of aspiration. So now comes an exercise, but what we mean here is, first of all, that we can actually train ourselves. We're not in one way or another. We might think, oh, this is how I am, but we're not. We can change. We can shift. We are, believe it or not, we are constructed by so many attitudes and opinions and conditions and so forth. We are conditioned individuals, and we can be proactive in this process of conditioning. So this is where we direct the mind, which is what we mean with aspiration. So here's something that has nothing to do particularly with being someone who is, you could say, engaged in serious Buddhist theory and practice, but simply just someone who has no background. We would then have a section here, which is then for non-Buddhists. It says, as you lie down to go to sleep, think of yourself. Think to yourself, tonight I may die. This may be it. I may never wake up again. And of course, this is not about a morose exercise. This is more about us actually beginning to become attuned, to really appreciating where we are, to seize the day, to seize the moment. So that's where we're not doing this to become depressed, but it's really just to, first of all, be prepared, because there will be a time where we will not wake up again. But then again, until that time comes, to do this kind of exercise also enables us to appreciate much more what there is, and realize, have a much more greater perspective and appreciation for our existence. And that's where then it only comes natural, as it then follows, to forgive those you need to forgive, realizing the futility of holding on to what has nothing to do with reality, but entirely is what our attitudes and resentments that we keep in our mind. And sometimes we guard these as if they were precious heirlooms, and we drag them with us from day after day, month after month, year after year, unnecessarily. It has nothing to do with reality. It's entirely our own memories that we're fixating on and holding on to. Letting go of that is where we can travel light. So we forgive those that we need to forgive. We forget everything that should be forgotten. Bring to mind, Rinpoche says, anything that calms and relaxes you. It could be a falling leaf or a quacking duck. Simple things that speak loud of the actual reality that we're in. Takes us out of our thinking and our cerebral regurgitation of particular themes. And that's where we could actually connect with just being simple and being present. Rinpoche says, more importantly, make the wish that you and every other sentient being will have and experience all that is good. In fact, you can focus on caring for others more than yourself. Not only will it bring you great joy, it will simultaneously ensure that you yourself are well looked after. So this is one of the great secrets, that we're so much better off when we care for others, not in an artificial, contrived manner, but in a genuine way. Then Rinpoche says, as you fall asleep, your awareness of your body, what your eyes see, what your nose smells, what your tongue tastes, and so on, will be detached by sleep. Our ordinary perceptions will cease. Then we fall asleep, and all of a sudden we lie there, we are thinking, okay, falling asleep, or when will I fall asleep, and whatever we might be thinking, and then all of a sudden we wake up again. Something was just, this gap happened. When you next wake up, imagine that you have been reborn and that a new life has just begun. The point here is this freshness. Before we begin to sort of click into the ordinary, you could say, pre-existing tracks that we ordinarily just habitually, blindly, in our dullness, tag along with, to actually come back fresh. Rinpoche says, observe how you reconnect with your senses and sense objects. Simply just connect. Notice the song of the blackbird. Smell your stale morning breath. Taste your nighttime mouth taste. Think to yourself, the world I have awoken into will not last forever. Look at your new table and that packet of exquisite, unopened Japanese stationery. Use them both and appreciate them now. It may be your last chance. So Rinpoche has a thing for Japanese stationery. It might be that you have a different particular something that you're appreciative of, but just appreciate. This is the message here. So then Buddhists, they might then practice as follows. If you wish, Rinpoche says, follow an old Buddhist tradition and imagine that all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have gathered on your pillow. Then, just before you lie down, offer them a prostration. There's many who do that. They'll do 3 prostrations, having the object of refuge in front of them, and consider then as they lie down, they then lie down with their head in the lap of the refuge. If you would like to emulate the Buddha's famous reclining position, lie on your right side as you go to sleep. Think, and this is where in the book you have an image a bit further up with the Buddha reclining on his right side. It says, think, I want to make good use of this night's sleep. I surrender to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. I want this night's sleep to be beneficial and meaningful for both myself and others. So this is where, like Rinpoche said, this is about aspiration, and this is about actually having some determination. If we want to be able to seize our dreams, there has to be this component of determination. As you fall asleep, then think, I'm dying. My consciousness and my senses is dissolving. So that's how you fall asleep. Again, training, preparation. As you wake up, think, I have been reborn. I long to make good use of this fleeting life for the benefit of myself and others. These 2 components here are extremely important because it's not just about, we would sometimes say, if you can fully embrace life, you can fully embrace death. We often have these kinds of sayings. And this, of course, could very well become a rather glib cliche. But the fact remains that it actually is valid, because all the time it will be our consciousness that's engaging. And the more this consciousness is awake and not cluttered by baggage, the more we'll actually be able to appreciate wherever this consciousness is, whether it's presently engaged in this, what we call the intermediate state of this life, or the intermediate state of being after our life, this life, then it's the consciousness that engages it. And so for us to have this acceptance of reality, to fall asleep then thinking I'm dying, my consciousness of my senses is dissolving, prepares us. And this also really enables us to have a much more vast and much more appreciative experience of our entire, completely different perspective on our situation, our life. And that's where some of the small, niggly, petty concerns that we very often fixate on and keep going over and over again, that we actually can see how pointless they are. So this exercise of just actually thinking, this is it, I'm leaving, very, very valuable, both in terms of preparing for death and also in terms of having a better life. And it says, as you wake up, think, I have been reborn. I long to make good use of this fleeting life for the benefit of myself and others. This is where there is this appreciation for where we have. And again, where we can let go of the sort of very often these issues that we drag along, resentments, anger, so forth. You could say the Buddha's teaching is rather annoying because it presents potential for what we are. It uncovers what we truly are, but it also doesn't make a secret of our bad, destructive habits. And that was, there has to be this humble recognition that is willing to look at where it is that we are stumbling, where it is that we're hanging on to what is not particularly constructive. So there has to be this acknowledgement that we could do better, simply because we are better. We don't need to justify particular negative, constructive, destructive habits. We can actually acknowledge that this is something we could let go of. And that's why here we're given the opportunity. It's a fresh day. Try to notice when you wake up before actually the sort of we're getting caught in that familiar rut or predictable track that we often are on, how there's a freshness the first moment that we wake up. So we think, I have been reborn. I long to make good use of this fleeting life for the benefit of myself and others. So still in the department of those that study the Dharma, particularly for those then that engage this vision of Buddha nature and incorporate that on the basis of apprenticeship with a guru. And this is then what we refer to as the tantric practitioners, in which there are various practices of yoga that enable us to connect with reality in a very direct way. And particularly then, there's a very profound practice of sleep yoga. Here Rinpoche says, aspire to perceive and experience the luminosity of simple cognizance. So our mind has the capacity to know. It also has the capacity to generate images. It's not just that we're a blind sort of robot that just has cognition, but there's more than that. Our cognition is in no way linear and somewhat, you could say, just linear. It has this capacity of creation, of beauty, of power, and so forth. Of course, when it's filtered through our insecurity and our ego, this luminosity becomes rather a dim light, but its actual nature is luminous, and it is in fact inherent, innate to us. So this is what we aspire to experience, this simple cognizance that's free from the ordinary traps of our conceptuality and our conceptual constructs. And it's within that that the luminous nature of mind becomes manifest. So to train in that, then, Rinpoche says, as the process of falling asleep offers an excellent opportunity for recognizing this luminosity, make strong aspirations to simply cognize, to be conscious while we're sleeping. At death, all your sensory mechanisms will dissolve, which means this simple cognizance will be entirely unbothered by your senses and your reactions to sense objects. All that will be left is your mind. And while the mind that carries all the various patterns and so forth, what we call karma, of course, this travels with us. But if we have in this life engaged this capacity to not be entangled, and to not be entangled in our perceptions and our habitual impulses, and to be able to connect with and experience and have familiarize ourselves with this luminosity of simple cognizance, then this is than what we travel with. This will be an incredible asset to us as we travel on. So bearing in mind the sleep practice that has already been described, visualize a lotus at the center of your heart on which sits your guru, who is the embodiment of all the Buddhas. Then, as you fall asleep, just think about your guru. So this is where Tantrikas then have various instructions that then really highlight how we could connect with this ground nature through the reflection of our ground nature in the form of the manifestation of the guru, the embodiment of all the Buddhas and the embodiment of all awakening. So this yoga focuses then on recollecting and mingling with the teacher's mind as we fall asleep. So these are some incredibly profound instructions that also offer some very, very radical and incredibly valuable perspectives for us in this life, but also as we travel on. So I've just been going over some of the sections here very briefly. And of course, I would warmly recommend everyone to, while we go over this, it's, you know, you could say we present the material. This is so much something that we, of course, are hoping that you'll be revisiting on your own. So at this point, I'm going to hand you over to Tsering, who will then present the next component of the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jakob. Can you just spotlight me? Yeah, that's great.
I'm making you host now, huh? And
okay.
Spotlight you. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you, Jakob. We've now completed chapter 3 of Living as Dying, Simple Practices to Prepare for Death. And if you have any questions from the section on sleep practice that Jakob has just covered, please put them in the chat box and he will be available to answer them at the end of the session. I'd like to now read a related section to the topic of sleep practice from the end of the next chapter, How Buddhists Prepare for Death. It's on page 58. Get used to the idea that death is imminent. If we could please screen share that, Jakob. So here Rinpoche says, even if you're fit and healthy enough to beat Michael Phelps in the 200-meter butterfly, it's never too early to start preparing for death. As you fall asleep, try doing the sleep practice that we just covered on page 47. Convince yourself that you'll die during the night and yearn to be reborn instantly in the realm of Amitabha. And here, if you're not a Buddhist, you could think about what you would yearn for. Perhaps a happy, fulfilling rebirth where you can be of benefit to others. Or for those who can't believe in rebirth, may I die peacefully without regret. And then most importantly, when you wake up next morning, remember that all of phenomenal existence is temporary. If you dream, remember that dreaming is a bardo. And Rinpoche goes on to say, originally this chapter, and one could also say this whole book, was written specifically for Buddhists, but actually everyone can practice these methods. Seasoned Buddhists, those who have just discovered the Buddhist teachings, agnostics, atheists, those who care for the dying, everyone. And we'll be returning to this chapter in session 15 on June 26th. So now we've finished with the screen share. Thank you, Jakob. And I'd like to invite our Living as Dying team member, Julie StAubyn, to join us to share from her experience as a funeral director.
Hello.
Giving information on a closely related topic to what we've already been discussing in this session, funerals.
Hello.
Thank you, Julie.
Hi. Well, I've called my talk Funeral Business because largely it is a business. The funeral business in Australia and in many other countries are run by big companies, and while they do their best to make it a very personal experience for everybody, the basis of that is that it is a business. So I'm just going to try today to give you a few tips about what you might expect when faced with planning a funeral and attending a funeral. So I've just thought about this and realized that we do all live supported by shared customs and laws, and a diverse range of religious beliefs and customs, and burial rites and practices usually reflect the faith of the deceased person and also the law of the land. And following this tradition, the mourners take comfort in knowing that by following that tradition, the loved one will be farewelled properly, and that when they die themselves, they'll probably have the same send-off and hopefully will even end up in the same place. In the modern world, many of us have moved away from our families and from our traditions. And so we're a little bit lost when it comes to dealing with death and with the funerals and preparing of funerals. We used to know exactly what to do, like when Jakob was speaking about the death of his parents. It was really all taken care of for you by the local priest. You knew what to wear to the funeral, where to sit in the church, and what you were expected to do as a person who was grieving or as somebody who was mourning your loved one. We have moved away from caring for our loved ones at home, and many of us will die in either a care home, a palliative care, or hospital situation. This can be really disempowering for a lot of people. And for people who are lucky enough to be cared for in a hospice situation, to which Kirsten has a lot more information than me, but people who are unable to be cared for at home by their loved ones, either because they no longer feel able, or maybe they themselves are completely exhausted by the care and process, will choose to go into care to be looked after until they die. I've just got a few points here about how you might go about preparing for the funeral if you have been caring for somebody and they are still in your care. So Tsering will be able to prompt me a little bit with a few questions at this point.
I think the first question that comes to mind, Julie, is how long can you keep the body at home and after the person has deceased, and who do you notify first of all?
Yeah, so it depends on the state in Australia in which you live and possibly where else you are in the world. But you can keep the body at home with you for many hours after the person has died. Can I just ask Kirsten how long you can keep the deceased person in your care in the hospice situation?
Usually we recommend about 12 hours maximum. So depending on you know, the climate as well. But yeah, 12 hours is probably our recommendation to be the longest. But we have had clients who would, you know, do 3 days as well. So if there's a you know, like a Buddhist belief behind that, then that can be longer as well.
And that would be taking into consideration keeping the environment cool and the deceased person.
That's right.
In some sort of
Cool.
state.
Yes, and in a cool environment. So it really needs to be, you know, the temperature really needs to come down in the room. And that's more so at home. So if someone dies at home, they can stay at home for quite a while, and that's no problem legally. Not in Queensland anyway. Yeah.
So in the case of an expected death, you can hire, it's like a refrigerated sheet that you place underneath the deceased person, and that helps to keep the body cool. You can also use ice bricks or anything that you've got just to keep them cool for as long as possible. You do need to notify a doctor who can pronounce the person as having died. And the other people you should let know are those who you feel might like to say goodbye to the person before they're taken into care. Yeah. If the death occurs in a hospital, of course, there's going to be a time factor as to how long you can actually sit with that person, because there's always a need for that room for somebody else. So you will probably find also in an aged care home the same sort of time constraint as to how long you can sit with that person. Once the person has died and is in care, then an independent doctor will need to confirm the cause of death. Especially important when you have a cremation planned. You need a second doctor to look at confirm the cause of death. Yeah.
So sometimes, Julie, there's a coroner involved with a death. When is that happening? So
anytime there's an accidental, unusual or unexplained death, the coroner will be called in. Suicide, homicide, or even if the deceased person has not seen a doctor for 3 months. So the coroner will basically see to you in their own time. It's a very frustrating process because it can take many weeks. Some families are waiting for weeks before they can actually plan the funeral. So it really depends on how many people that they have that they're working with. Nothing at all can happen until the body has been released from the coroner. So it's really a matter of the police liaising with the coroner until they've done the work they need to do, and then the body gets released. Yeah.
So the funeral home will be in touch with the coroner.
That's right.
And hopefully there will have been discussions with the dying, with the person, you know, what sort of send-off they want.
Yes, yes.
And yeah.
And organising the funeral itself really depends on how much of the organising you want to do yourself, whether you want to hand the entire process over to an outside party or whether you want to do most of the organising yourself. It'll also depend on what the person who has died, what they would have liked. Some people organise their entire funeral before they die, or even have a prepaid funeral in place with a funeral home where everything has been taken care of right down to writing their own eulogy. So they might be considered someone who likes to keep control of things, but I also think it's a great act of compassion in many ways for the families not to have to make lots of decisions at a time when they're really feeling most unable to do so.
And it's such an easy thing to do, isn't it, Julie? Like you can refer to something like our bottom drawer book, and you can go through the steps and just complete, the different areas that need to be covered, and that it's such a huge help to the family or the people who are left behind.
Yeah, this is right. Once you get to the point where you decide to go ahead with the funeral, you be really spend a lot of time looking into which funeral home you might use and how you might go about it, because you would not undertake any other major event. This is an event that you're planning. It's not unlike a wedding, and in fact everything about it is exactly the same in terms of what is offered for a complete service. So you need to shop around, you need to ask as many questions as possible, and never feel concerned that your questions might be silly, because to you it's really important that you get what you want. And the main thing to remember is to ask questions about the cost, because many people feel that they will be pressured into making purchases for things that they don't really want, but they also feel it's a little bit tacky to even mention money. So they just go along with whatever's suggested for them. But let's say you've made the decision about which funeral home you would like to use, and at that point a phone call's made and your loved one is taken into care by that funeral home, collected from the care home or the mortuary and taken into care by them. So the process starts really with that phone call, giving them permission to take that person into care. And yeah, go on.
And once they're in care, you'll be asked to make many important decisions, and when you yourself are grieving and often exhausted and overwhelmed, and it can be quite a difficult time. Yes. That's where pre-planning can really be helpful, isn't it?
That's right, helpful for everybody. And even if there is a prepaid funeral plan there, it can always be slightly altered and made more personal. Sometimes people make them at a time in their life when they haven't really thought too much about personalising their own funeral, but really that's where you can add things and make them more about that person.
Yes.
Funerals are for the living, but they are about the deceased person. So,
and what would we take with us when we go to, like the funeral director will ask to see us, and we'll need to take quite a few different documents and things with us?
That's right. So we need to find that little stash of documents, the bottom drawer book, the ethical will, the will, all the things that are going to assist you at the time that you meet with the funeral director. One of the main things they will ask you is about family history, and that's really important because they will need the correct spelling and dates of the deceased person's name, birth, all those things for the funeral service itself, but you're actually creating a lot of legal documents. So the main one being the death certificate, which gets generated on the day of the funeral. So you'll need to find out all sorts of things that you probably didn't know about your mother and father's mother and father, and where they were born, and the dates. All those things need to be brought into play so that you can help the funeral director to create a full death certificate. You'll also be asked to bring some clothes for the person to be dressed in. And some people actually don't really have any idea about what that might be. For them, it's okay for them to be still in their pajamas or their favourite clothes that they died in. But for others, they'd like to have them prepared in their best clothes, with fully made up with their jewellery. And so it's a good idea to take that with you for the first meeting. And I guess a bit of an idea about whether you're having a burial or a cremation, because the whole service will be based on that information. Yeah. Just checking my notes.
Then you also, people sometimes take a photo of the loved one so that the mortician can prepare if there's going to be an open coffin or a viewing beforehand.
That's right. It's very difficult for the funeral home to present your mother, for instance, looking like her normal self when they have no idea what she would look like when she's not very unwell, or basically they need a little bit of help there to personalise. So I know with my own mother, we didn't do that, and the children all said that she didn't look like Nana to them because they'd put makeup on her, and she wasn't someone who ever wore makeup. So I think it's a really good idea to take along a photograph with you.
Yeah.
Once you get into the planning of the funeral itself, there'll be all sorts of aspects of the service that you will have to bring some more things to, but I'd say those things can wait for later on. You can drop things in later, but those basic things need to be in place in order to get the process started.
So I guess we come back to the main decision is whether it's going to be a burial or a cremation.
Yeah, and that can depend very much on family tradition and on religious beliefs as well. In the modern day, a lot of people make a decision about cremation or burial depending on their budget, and if the deceased person wasn't really concerned either way and there wasn't a plot already purchased, then the family might decide to go with a cremation because it really is a much cheaper option. And also, when you are planning to have a burial, then you're really locking that geographical location in for the family, so that if they're spread out all over the place, they've really got to go to that place to pay respects to their loved one. And this is happening less and less. If you're going with a burial, remember that you're buying a piece of real estate, and real estate is very expensive. If you are buying that plot of land in a big city, it's going to cost a lot more than if you're buying it in a little town somewhere. Usually the funeral home makes the arrangements with the cemetery and makes sure that everything that needs to be done to get ready for that burial will be done between the funeral director and the cemetery. Sometimes people choose just to have a graveside service, and you can really do most of that yourself. But if you choose to use the funeral director, then by having just a graveside service, you're doing away with a lot of the other costs, and also just meeting at the graveside with the coffin, with the mourners. It's a very intimate way of having a funeral. And as I say, you're cutting down on a lot of the costs that you would have if you had a service somewhere first and then went to the cemetery.
And I've heard that sometimes it's possible to apply to your local council and have burial on your own land. perhaps if you're in a rural area, you can arrange that. And there are also what's called bush burials, where it's more in a bushland setting.
That's right. There are some places do have natural burial grounds. I know there's a really beautiful one in Adelaide. They tend to not have a marker for the grave. They just have a GPS setting. The burials are not as deep in the ground, and they tend to use shrouds or more ecological types of coffins that have less impact on the environment. Yeah. And it's just a matter of checking out your local council as to what all the paperwork is that you need if you wanted to have someone buried on your own property. I did work with a family here that were having a crypt built on their farm because they were Italians, and they were having a family crypt built there so that they could be laid to rest there. With the cremation, obviously a lot cheaper, and these days there's a trend to have the funeral service with the coffin in place, and then everyone leaves and the coffin is taken onto the crematorium. Much more popular these days is what they call a no service, no attendance, and once the deceased person is taken into care, they're cremated by the funeral home, and the ashes are returned to the family after the cremation, and then some sort of memorial service is held instead of having a formal funeral service. And that's really great for people who are scattered all over the world, who can't attend themselves, to come together at a time that's better suited for everybody, and just have a celebration of life instead of an actual funeral.
And with cremation, often a simple cardboard coffin is used, and you can decorate it yourself, and there are other alternatives available. We've been showing a few coffins and burial places on the slideshow while Julie's talking.
The part of my training as a funeral director was to go to a coffin factory and learn about how coffins are made, and seeing some of the different coffins that were available. They started in price at about $1,900 and went up to $50,000, depending on your budget and how extravagant you felt like being. A lot of people take the coffins home and decorate them themselves, and I found this to be particularly useful when a young person had died, especially for teenagers who probably have very little experience of death, but to have their hands on the coffin and decorating them and writing things and sticking things on there, and just taking some of that fear away from having to see a coffin and thinking that someone that they knew that was their age was going to be put in that coffin. It made a huge difference for people to spend time with that coffin before the service and before the person was placed in the coffin. So I'd really encourage that. Another thing to mention is to the funeral director, before the person is taken into care and in that preliminary meeting phase, it's really good to give them an idea of the size of the person, because we all come in different sizes and shapes, and it's much better in the beginning to let them know, so that when the funeral is being planned and prices are being decided upon, that they know whether the person is very large or very small. That would really be helpful.
And I think I remember you telling me, Julie, that there's cardboard coffins available for as little as $85 through
Yes, tender funerals.
funerals. And these are the sort of ones that you can decorate yourself.
Yeah, that's right. They come as a flat pack that you can just assemble yourself. I found that a lot of funeral directors discouraged people from making their own coffins or using cardboard coffins because they felt that if something went wrong on the day at the service, that it would really be their responsibility if the coffin didn't hold up to the specifications. So in order to make sure that there wasn't any sort of unpleasantness, they preferred to be in charge of sourcing the coffin. And the other thing to remember is that the biggest money maker for a funeral home is the coffin. That's where they make the most money. So I do know that Costco sells coffins as well, so you can send away for them. If you decide that you'd like to spend some time with your loved one before the funeral itself, quite often you'll be charged a fee by the funeral home. They don't all charge a fee, but some of the bigger ones that are really very busy, they need to prepare the person, have a space available for the viewing and staff to look after you while you're there. So it actually is quite an expensive thing to have a viewing before a funeral. So it's really good to know that, because as I say, quite often you won't want to ask questions about what things cost, and it does come as quite a shock later to get that really big bill, which a standard funeral in Australia can range in price from about $6,500 to about $14,000, and that's without too much extravagance. So shop around, ask lots of questions, and make it really relevant for your loved one. As Jakob said, beautiful services, but when they're not personalised and about that person that you loved, you can come away feeling a little bit empty. I know I did when I attended a funeral of a friend when I was 18. It was a standard church service. They added her name in the spots they needed to, but I came away from that feeling like I could have been at anybody's funeral. So I really encourage you to personalise it as much as you possibly can.
So I guess part of that is who we appoint to host the service.
Yes. Most of us have a friend or a family member who's really good at public speaking, probably great at telling the odd joke and making everyone feel, you know, part of it. But be really mindful when you're choosing someone to run the service that they have experience with crowd control. And remember that at a funeral, emotions can run high. So you need to pick somebody who's either done it before, done it as a job, like a funeral celebrant, a priest, minister of religion, master of ceremonies. The other thing is that if you choose someone who hasn't done it before or hasn't really got the experience, it's very hard to keep the time factor under control, because generally they'll give you 1 hour to complete the service from start to finish, because you won't be the only funeral that they're looking after on the day. So while everyone's there to show respect and give that person a beautiful send-off, they still need to be mindful of the fact that they're renting a premises and they have to be careful about the time. So
Yeah, and speaking of time, we're running out of time too.
yes.
But there are still so many details that need to be, that you'll be called upon to address, like deciding if you want to put a funeral notice in a newspaper or just put it on social media, or what do you do for catering for the funeral?
Yes.
Whether it'll be, you know, at the at the church or the crematorium or so forth, or at home, and then funerals are a big production these days, and there are many other parts to the service that you probably need to think about, such as photos and music. I heard you say that that's a big one, Julie.
Yeah, the modern standard Australian funeral, people almost expect to have music, well, 3 pieces of music. Music for when you enter the church and set the scene, music with a photo tribute of around 30 photos, which will be something else you'll need to think about taking to the funeral arrangement meeting, either the first time you meet or as a follow-up. Please restrict yourself to 1 song and about 30 images, because again, you've got very little time and the natives get restless. It's really hard to sit through an extremely long service, and you can always spend time after the funeral at the wake to look at more photos and share those stories and listen to their favourite music. So think about the children and the elders who are sitting there for all that time, and keep it short and keep it sweet, and everyone will thank you for it. So yeah, the photos, the 3 pieces of music. So the 3rd piece is for when you're being carried out of the chapel or when people are leaving. And it's really nice if that can be something a little bit uplifting, because it's a bit devastating to put on something terribly sad for the end. It's nice to try and give everyone a little bit of an uplift there. What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong really does the trick.
And all the better if you have a local choir or a live music to perform that.
Yes, and we've done that many times, use the local choir or someone on a harp, or just some live music really is the best possible way to go. As you say, there's many other things that we would need to think about. Funeral notices are no longer a legal requirement, so it's really up to you if you do that or not. It's $300 to $500 for a tiny little notice in a metropolitan newspaper. So I'd suggest go social media, Bush Telegraph, or one of those online forums. You'll be offered everything. Butterfly releases, which I would suggest that you probably think twice about. It doesn't always end well for the poor little butterflies. Balloons, now banned in most states because they're polluting and dangerous to wildlife. You can use bubbles instead. Doves are beautiful. They just fly home at the end, and it's a really uplifting thing to do. The funeral home will have quite a lot of merchandise that they will offer you, a memorial book to sign on the day so that people can look back and know who attended the funeral and make contact with them and thank them. But hey, you can provide your own book. You don't need to spend $50 to $100 on the book. The order of service you can make yourself. This is one we made for my mother. Just a fold of paper, and that way people get a photograph to look at during the service. They learn a little bit about that person. I put a poem in there that my mother loved. They will probably offer you things like a recording of the service, because it's all done now with live streaming for people who can't attend, who are coming from overseas or whatever. You can buy the service recording. How long is a piece of string when it comes to all the many different things that you might be offered? Only purchase what makes sense to you, what you can afford. As far as dealing with the funeral home itself, they will probably use lines like, your loved one deserved the best funeral. They might say you want to make a funeral that they can be proud of, or a fitting send-off. And you can do all of that with as much or as little input as you yourself feel you're capable of. Mal McKissick, who works in palliative care, he has written a lot of books about working with the dying, and he says that grieving people are like 8-year-olds. They're confused, they lose their appetite, they don't sleep, they're very sad. And at times like that, you're being asked to organise what turns out to be a major life event. So take your time until the date for the funeral has been booked. There really is no need to hurry.
Thank you, Julie. And we might wonder, as Buddhists, how does this relate to those of us who would just like a simple Buddhist funeral? And we'll be discussing that later in the program.
Yes.
But whatever you do, pre-planning is important. That's the key to it all.
Or at least let your family know if you'd like to be buried or cremated, because they're the two major questions. And if you don't really mind, that's okay. They can make that decision.
Now, are there any questions for Julie? It's fine to also unmute to ask your question.
There's a number of comments and questions in the chat box.
Would you be able to read them, please, Sangma? I can't
Oh, sure.
see it from where I am.
Okay, going back up. So there's a lot of comments. So we have Belle in Melbourne. If it's a practitioner and it is their expressed wish to not notify anyone except certain particular people like a lama, and not to contact others, including a doctor, for at least several days, one can do that, right? ? And then I'll just share Belle's next part of the message, because she says she left her mum completely undisturbed for 8 full days before even physically going around there. Then the police came and they deemed the death unsuspicious, but it did go to the coroner for the cause of death. The funeral parlour was already chosen in Mum's case, so that was easy. The cause of death wasn't released for quite some time after the cremation. I didn't do the funeral for about a month after the body was taken to the morgue. Why rush? So yeah, the first question was around, do we have to notify? And then Belle shared her experience.
I think when the person is aged and their death is expected, you probably got a lot more leeway as to timing. But at some point, a doctor does need to be called to confirm the death.
And it probably changes from state to state.
Yes.
Would it, Julie?
Yes, and well done you. If that sounds wonderful that you were able to do that, to spend as much time as possible, because we're just hurried along through this process. And I understand why, having been a funeral director, because you are really under time constraint, and everyone will arrive and everything needs to be done, and it needs to be absolutely better than perfect, because you are creating a service, to honour somebody's life. So you want everything to be done, but when possible, take your time. Spend as much time as you can with the person when they've died. And I didn't have a funeral for my mother for 2 weeks after she died, because we just couldn't get the family together. And that's actually fine with most funeral homes, to keep the person in care for quite a long period of time.
Belle goes on to share again, I wasn't asked to bring anything of my mum's by the funeral people, and also my mum's body was quite decomposed, so we didn't have a viewing. Then there's a question saying, would it still be important to know the precise time of the burning in order to do appropriate practice at that time?
I imagine so. I did look after a family whose mother had prepaid a funeral. She had her own coffin made, which the funeral home stored for her. She didn't want a service. She didn't want any of the family attending. But they asked me if they could be on the grounds to watch the smoke as it came out of the cremator. And we just sat on the veranda nearby. They lit incense and did their practice. And when the smoke came up, they felt they were as close to her as they could be at that time.
And we'll be covering this more when we speak about specifically about Buddhist funerals and ceremonies that are specifically for that.
Someone asked a question about coffins, but you've already covered that, Julie. Belle went on to say that she hosted the funeral for her mum and designed the whole program and invited monks to chant. And people were then thanking for the sharing. More thank yous, thank yous, thank you, lots of useful info. A little bit more sharing from Belle. Her mum didn't express that she wanted to be left. It was Belle's choice because she had an intuition that she had died and she wanted to pray and leave her be. And Kirsten's made the comment that a nurse can also confirm death, not only a doctor.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah. So that's, I've read them all now.
And are there any earlier questions in the chat box for Jakob regarding sleep practice?
I didn't see any. Did you see any, Jakob? I think we started, the chat really started with the death.
No, I haven't seen any. I think we're good.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, so next week, while Rinpoche's teachings are still fresh in our minds, Jakob will be continuing with chapter 6, The Painful Bardo of Dying. And we'll now dedicate the merit.
This virtuous accumulation of merit we offer so that all obstacles dissolve, and that at the time of our death, each of us may find ease in dying and swift rebirth in the pure land of great bliss, quickly gaining enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And we have an addition here. We probably won't be reading this every time, but just so to draw your attention to it. Just a note here to let you know that if the material presented today has raised any concerns for you, it is suggested you speak with a trusted friend, your personal health professional, or your Buddhist teacher or instructor. Okay.
Thank you, Jakob and Julie and Annie Shenpan and Kirsten and Ross for your teamwork in making this session possible. And we look forward to seeing everyone again next Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tsering.
Thank you.